Hey everybody, Savant here. Welcome to another DebateCraft Politics discussion. Today I'll be debating an anarchist who goes by the title The Fly. Should we abolish the US government? Is anarchy the way forward? We'll be addressing all these questions in today's discussion. But first, if you have a strong opinion you'd like to defend, head over to debatecraft.com. That's debatecraft.com. We have rated debates, informal debates, and an official leaderboard, so you can test your skills against other strong debaters. Now, without further ado, let the debate begin. Fly, you have the floor.
I believe that the state is inherently unethical, right?
Yeah.
And I believe this because of property ethics. And property ethics says that we live in a scarce world. Hence, there must be the best way to divide up these resources.
Mhm.
This doesn't mean that we must follow these ethics. I believe these ethics, so I'm trying to convince you to adopt these ethics. The way we divide these resources is via ownership. The only way to get ownership over land is to produce labor in a piece of land that does not have ownership already attached to it,
Mhm.
or you voluntarily exchange it with someone else. And also, possession does not mean ownership. Or at least not, yeah. And these rules, right? The producing labor, right, before ownership, and voluntarily exchanging is something the state has never done or does. Hence, to me, this makes it illegitimate. So this to me means that anarchism is the most ethical system there is.
Okay, so I think I understand. So the way that you would deal with land ownership is just first come, first serve, basically. The first person to own a piece of
Um,
land.
well, yeah, you would well not just come, you would have to produce labor, right?
Mhm.
And do constant of it. Not
Okay,
not everybody that says property ethics says that, but I do.
okay,
I do think you have to do it constantly.
constantly. Okay, so I guess I would advocate probably, I'll probably take some other tax differently, but since we're on the topic
Okay.
of land ownership, I would advocate that Georgism is probably a superior alternative. Do you understand just sort of the basic idea of Georgism, where it's taxing land?
No, no,
Okay,
I don't know Georges.
so Georgism, it's based on sort of, it's kind of similar to what you're saying, except well, it would say that the government should tax land, among other reasons, because the supply curve for land is just a vertical line. So taxing land, you're not necessarily creating perverse incentives. People aren't going to be producing less of land. The idea of Georgism is basically anyone can live on land, but then you're taxed for the value of the land. So if somebody is occupying, I don't know, 1,000 acres of land, they're going to pay more tax than somebody who's taking 1 acre of land. So I think the basic reason that this is more fair than what you're proposing is that sort of first come, first serve, you're giving an advantage to people who are just luckier. Maybe let's say someone who's born first can claim a ton of land, and then people who are born later, they could charge exorbitant fees to them. Another reason is, let's say somebody has a disability, so they're not as able to claim land. But then once they did get access to the land, they could make use of it in, I don't know, their own way. So I don't know. I think that we shouldn't be rewarding conquering necessarily.
Mhm.
I think it's fair to tax people on the basis of land ownership, at least, because land isn't something you created. So I don't know how you could really say it's fair to say that somebody gets access to land just because they were the first person to use it, if being the first person was largely based on luck. And there are a few other things that I think it's probably fair to tax. For example, externalities. So pollution, for example, can have negative effects on other parts of the globe. Most economists would say that you should implement taxes on pollution or taxes on gasoline, for example, because traffic creates a negative externality. I guess there are sort of three ways to deal with externalities. You can just allow people to pollute as much as they want. You can tax it, or you could ban it. And I don't think banning it is feasible because a lot of the things that we do just have external. It just wouldn't be feasible to not create any externalities, to not produce any industry because you're kind of just shutting down the economy. And just to allow as much as you want, then you're effectively allowing people to destroy the planet or harm other people by polluting as much as they want. But the middle ground is just taxing it, where whatever negative effect that people are creating by polluting, they're paying a tax that's in some way equivalent to that, and the government can redistribute that money, and it's more fair. And there are ways to make that tax progressive, but that's just sort of a simplified way of these are some taxes that I would defend as more fair than anarchism. And I don't know if you're opposed to those taxes, then we could argue the morality of those.
Um, yeah, I would just say that like the state, right, has no right to tax, right? And the tax needs to legitimize it. I mean, not the tax. The state needs to legitimize itself to even have the right to tax, right? Like, and how I explain the property ethics, right?
Yep.
Um, the state already never did that. So to me, it's the equivalent of like a unicorn taxing me. So I just don't see how that is like fair.
Well, I think the
Then
well, I think the idea is it doesn't matter if it's a unicorn taxing me as long as the tax itself is justified. So if you are doing some harm to society, society would have, I don't know, if you're attacking someone, then they would have the right to defend themselves, right? But if you are
yeah.
creating negative effects on society as a whole, like let's say you're polluting a ton, or I don't know, you're just releasing, I don't know, toxins into a lake, then people would have the right to do something about that. Presumably, you would agree with that. If you're just harming society as a whole, then I
Mhm.
guess from an anarchist perspective, it doesn't really matter who's stopping you from polluting the lake, just as long as you're harming society, and so they're defending society. So the
Mhm.
reason that I would say the government is, I think the government is just sort of a placeholder for an organization that's imposing its will on society, right? So if we agree that it's justified to do something about somebody polluting a lake, then taxing externalities in the way that I've said, so for example, putting a tax on pollution to limit the amount people are polluting, or compensating the people who are harmed by that pollution, it doesn't really matter what organization is doing it. But then suppose we have a government that's filling that role and is preventing you from excessively polluting or taxing people who do pollute and putting some standards on that, then I don't see how that's unjustified. Just because if it's justified for someone to deal with that, then why can't it be a government or just some group of
Um,
people that we call a government?
yeah. The reason. Well, no. Okay, I agree with your definition of government, right? I believe government is voluntary, right? I'm against state, right? Maybe we have those definitions mixed up, right? But I think how you use the word government, I use state, right? And
Sure.
I believe the state is coercive and involuntary and a military occupation, right? And so to compare it to just like I don't know, the local neighbor, right, that goes in and like helps someone
Hmm.
to like a military occupation is why I believe the state is unjustified in helping.
But I don't
Because
know.
it already has no right to exist, but your neighbor does.
Sure, your neighbor does, but then if you have enough of your neighbors are preventing people from harming each other, or the neighbors are sort of let's say the neighbors crowdfund something, but then they get additional funds from taxing you from polluting the lake. I think my idea of what the state is that I'm saying here is people who are stopping you from excessively polluting society, right? Just scaled up, enough of them working together and imposing some tax on an externality. It could be on land. I would say that that's the fair way to sort of make sure that land is distributed, because by taking land, I think everyone sort of has different rights, and so they can come into conflict. So, for example, maybe I have a right to go and to do something unless it imposes on someone else's right. But then what about land? Do we both have the right to use this public resource? Do I have the right to build something on it? Well, it seems like I do, but now I'm violating your right to go and build something on the resource. So there's no way to sort of satisfy all of that. That's why I think it taxes the fairest system, because you are taking something for yourself that could benefit society, but then you're compensating society. And so it incentivizes people who could get more of a benefit out of that resource to be the ones using it, because they can afford to sort of eat the tax, as opposed to just conquering a ton of land because they got there first. And
Um,
so my idea of a state is just sort of scaling up people who are using their right to defend society. So if I'm going and dumping poison into a lake, and then there's a group of people who say you can't dump poison into the lake, and they're coming in and stopping you, I would call that a state. And then we can deal more with the financial structure of how they're doing that. But you would say that it's okay for a group of people to stop you from dumping poison into a lake, and then maybe we sort of work from there to get to what I'm seeing as a justified state.
mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
So okay,
If I could, do you think it's wrong for me to cut down a tree in my house?
for you to cut down a tree in your house, I think that uh, let's say there's a forest with a lot of trees. I think that cutting down a single tree to build a house, the benefit to you is so much more than the harm to the environment. So I think you might be causing like a very small harm to the environment, but it's enough that in the absence of any sort of organized way, you need to survive. So that's justified because there's just no feasible way someone has to make use of the tree. However, I think that there is that small amount of harm to the environment. So if we sort of scale up what you're saying is there's nothing wrong with cutting down trees. Well, then what happens if you have some large organization that's cutting down all the trees and just sort of destroying the environment so that no one else can make use of the public resources? At that point, I think all those small harms to the environment begin to add up and it becomes to be something that people would be justified in addressing. So sort of the fact that when you're just exhaling carbon dioxide, then that's sort of nothing. But if you're putting a ton of carbon dioxide out there, that becomes significant enough that the harm might be more than the benefit. So I think the benefit of this implementing this tax system is that if you're cutting down a single tree, you're causing a very tiny amount of harm to the government, to society. So the tax would be proportional to that. They would be coming in and charging you a very small amount based on how much you're using. And somebody who's chopping down 100 trees would pay 100 times or they would be this group that's imposing its will would be forcing them to pay 100 times the tax. And so they would be paying more to compensate for the harm that they're doing to society. And someone who does 1,000 trees, they're paying even more. So I think the benefit of this tax is that if you go to the example that you gave where you're cutting down a tree for your house, is that wrong? Well, the wrongness is very, very small, and so the tax would be very, very small as well. But it would scale up to people harming the environment. And I think that's some of the difficulty with this strong libertarian anarchism is how do you draw a line that's not arbitrary between I can chop down a tree to build my house and I'm going to destroy the forest so nobody else can use it. I think one of those seems clearly like it's harming society and wrong, and one of those seems like it's something you should be allowed to do, but the tax allows it can be adjusted for those different situations. Whereas I think anarchism, you're dealing with absolutes, but then you're going to reach a situation where you're allowing harms to society that you probably wouldn't want to
Um, I just don't see why the state should be the arbiter of I don't know the rule or like
allow. Of
how
the
much
tax?
someone should get paid on. Yeah, and
Okay.
also I mean, I think there's like another answer. Like I think there are many ways to punish pollution than a coercive state,
Mhm.
and so
So
I just don't see why not. Like
So, in
why
your
the state has
anarchist
the right
society,
to tax.
let's say somebody is
Mhm.
polluting the environment, dumping poison. I keep coming to that back to that, but I think you get the idea that I'm just sort of using it as an example. So, someone's polluting the
Mhm.
environment more than you think they should be allowed to do. How do you propose sort of dealing with
Um, I wouldn't propose anything. Since I don't, it's not my job to propose what a society should do that I don't live in, right? Like even if I gave you an answer, right, how we would actually do it might be completely different,
that?
right?
Sure.
And it also would be completely different depending on what type of anarchism we're dealing with, right?
So,
Um,
okay. Do
so
you
I
think
just don't think I could answer that question.
so? If someone's harming society on that scale, where it's not sort of clear that they're targeting a single individual, but they are harming society as a whole, do you think that there'd be any person or group of people who would be justified in using force to prevent them from harming the environment? Because I think if you're going to say that it's justified to stop them, maybe it's not a state, but some person or some group has to do something about it, or it has to be justified in doing something about it. Would you agree with that, or do you dispute that? You would say like, or do you take like more of a
But
pacifist approach?
no, I'm just thinking. Um, yeah, I would say that there should be people to defend
Okay,
or like at least protect.
sure.
But I would say that those people have a right to defend
Hmm.
since their property is being harmed.
Okay,
But the state has no property, so he has no right to do
okay.
anything.
So I'm maybe I'm just kind of confused on the terminology you're using. Those people who do something, if they want to call themselves, I don't know, a state, would you have an opposition to those people? Like those people have the right to do something about it. If they want to call themselves a state, do you have a problem with them doing that?
Um, would I have a problem with them calling themselves a state?
Yeah.
I think I would, because they wouldn't be a state
So
since they have property rights and they have a legitimacy in existence.
okay, so but then that's what I'm saying is I'm arguing that a state could legitimately do something. So maybe I don't maybe so let me just look up I guess the definition. So I guess how states are normally defined is like international recognition, right? But
Yeah.
the idea of a state is sort of it's people living in an area who vote on a government or something or establish rulership over an area. So if you have a group of people, let's say these vigilantes who are going around and stopping this person from once they organize sufficiently and they say, because you are dumping poison into a lake, you have to compensate the people around you some amount based on how much harm you're doing to the environment. And we agree that they're justified in doing that because because there's harm being done, and so it's an extension of self-defense, so to speak. Then they are imposing rules. They're effectively imposing penalties. Are those not sort of things that a state would do? So, I mean, presumably they're collecting
Mm,
revenue, but we agree that this revenue is justified because it's compensation for a harm that somebody's doing.
well, I mean, I'm not entirely against rules, right? I'm not
Sure.
against rules in an anarchist society, right?
Mhm.
But the difference between just people saying, if you want to live here, right, these are the rules,
Mhm.
is that they're not coercive and they don't force these rules on people. You see
Okay.
what I'm saying? Which is why they're not a state. That would be the difference. Like that's why I'm cool with government, right? I'm cool with government in anarchist society.
Mhm.
It's a voluntary like organization that allocates resources. But
Mhm.
the state is forceful. That's
But
why I wouldn't
okay,
I wouldn't call that a state.
okay, so but they are forceful because they're forcing the person to stop polluting, or they're forcing the
Because
person to
those are
not.
the yeah, because those are the rules of that area for like the same reason that I believe, right, like if there's a neighborhood, right, that has constant loud noise and then you go in there and then complain about the loud noise, like you're not really justified in complaining since they were doing loud noise before you got there.
Sure,
So
but if
you're
somebody
the one aggressing
but that's not the only
on the
way
pro.
that a state could be formed, right? So if somebody is doing harm to the environment and then the neighbors around them say, we want to make a rule that you can't do harm to the environment, they were already there. So I think the argument you're making is works if you're talking about conquest, if you're talking about people going in and conquering an area and establishing a government. It does not work if we're talking about a state that's established by people living in a place, creating an organization to defend their rights against somebody who's creating harm to society. Because then they would be justified in imposing these rules.
Yeah, they are imposing rules, but it's
Sure.
not coercive.
So
Like
maybe so when you say
I just don't
coercive,
understand how it's coercive and involuntary.
so sorry, maybe I just didn't hear. So when you say coercive, could you be like more specific about like what your criteria are for that?
I think no taxes, no military occupation, no borders,
Okay,
right? Forceful things,
but
and infringements on property, right? Any infringement on, if an organization infringes on property, forcefully, then it is a state. If an
okay,
organization helps allocate resources, but it doesn't force anyone to do anything,
mhm,
then it's not a state, right?
okay, but
Which is
then
why the U.S. is a state, but the Zapatistas are not, right? Which is an anarcho-communist society, right?
okay, I think
Um,
at this point we might be kind of splitting hairs. So I'll just sort of I'll try to wrap this up, but or I'll try to wrap up this part and then go on to sort of more broader things that a state would do. So when you're talking about infringing on property, I think that forcing the person who's harming the environment to compensate people is you are sort of taking their property, but you're doing it as sort of like in response to harm that they've done to people around
mm,
them. Okay.
wait, no. Wait, how?
So
If it's in their property and they're destroying their
no, they're
piece of
destroying
property, right?
others.
Which
They're destroying other
they're
people.
destroying
So
everything. Oh, they're
by
destroying other people's property, then that would mean they're doing a property infringement, and aggression should be, or not aggression, but defense should be
okay.
acted upon them.
Sure. Okay. So
Like that's
maybe so maybe what I'm describing isn't the type of thing that you would object to. So if somebody's
Mhm.
that's kind of what I'm saying is I was saying that the state would in this group would be like the tax here would be in response to somebody harming the environment by in some way. But okay, maybe you would not consider that a state, you just consider it a government, so that's compatible with anarchism. Okay, so let's talk about sort of a broader level where the state will do things where they sort of tax consumption, or they tax, I don't know, they tax income, they tax a lot more things for that we would not generally consider harmful. So I guess I'll just come out and I'll agree that most of taxation is, I would say, theft. But I would say that theft can be justified in certain circumstances on a utilitarian basis, as long as sort of the good from the theft outweighs the harm. So I guess it's effectively a trolley problem where you probably know the analogy where you're killing one person to save five people, or in this case, I don't know. Would you say that you're justified in, I don't know, stealing food to save a starving child, or would you be more absolutist and say you should just never infringe on somebody's property rights, even if it's for the greater good?
No, no. Sorry, no. You are justified in stealing food if you are very hungry,
Okay, you are
because
justified.
that is moral. That
Okay.
would be moral, morally good, but ethically bad.
Okay, that's morally good. Okay. So what about like welfare, where you're trying to alleviate poverty and widespread, I don't know, like let's say there's a famine going on and some people have more than they need and some people don't have enough, and you're not trying to take everything, but you are trying to create a social safety net by taxing income or taxing spending or something.
Um, maybe that could happen, right? By a
Yeah.
justified organization, right? That's moral
Okay.
and ethical.
So
Uh,
why could like the U.S. government not be that justified organization, because it's taking people's money through taxation, but then it's using that to fund welfare programs. And obviously, not everything the U.S. government does is good, but I don't like a government similar to what we have today.
yeah. I think because the U.S. government is not a voluntary
Mhm.
organization,
Okay, but
and
when
it
I
is a coercive organization. That's what I would say. And it's like the solution that you have. I mean, you can say about anything. It's like Saddam Hussein, right? He had like like a super low crime rate because he had an oppressive police.
Sure.
But I don't think you believe that an oppressive police should be the way to do things, right?
Sure, because
Which is why,
I think at a
like,
certain point you cross the line where they start doing more harm than good. But I'm saying I
mhm.
agree that the state is coercive as it exists today, and it's not consensual. However, I would say that when you're stealing bread to feed a starving child, you are acting coercively toward the person whose bread you're stealing. I mean, at a certain when you're doing that, you are infringing on somebody's rights.
Mhm.
But I again, like in the analogy, I think what it establishes is it's justified to act coercively or steal from someone as long as you're doing it for the greater good. So, I mean, I think we could. I don't know if you dispute this, but there's probably instances where the state is coercing people, but the benefit for to society because of the free rider problem. So building roads, for example, creating schools, which is going to alleviate harm that's more longer term, or creating a social safety net program. Those things would all be net beneficial. So how is
Mhm.
the state acting coercively not justified if you as an individual are justified in acting coercively in stealing to meet your basic needs?
Um, well, I just don't believe that the state ever does a better good in creating anything than people cooperation can even do. Like I believe they're just like they just shove themselves in and act like the help, but cooperation could have already done that.
Okay,
So I just don't believe they do anything that truly is helpful.
okay, so I guess this is nice because we're sort of agreeing on this utilitarian framework, but we just sort of disagree about the the assumptions that we can make about what causes the greater good. So I guess if we look around the globe, there are plenty of instances where sort of a government collapses, and then you have this power vacuum, and you think, okay, maybe the government was harmful in some way, or it was people would sort of solve problems on their own, but then that it doesn't, become an anarchist utopia. Instead, you have some terrorist group that comes in, like I don't know, ISIS in the Middle East, or some other group comes in and fills the power vacuum with a much more oppressive regime. So the government, and that's just one example. Another example would be sort of the free rider problem, where everyone benefits from having roads, but the benefit to me from paying for a road does not justify the cost that I'd be putting on it. So the government, by taking a little bit of money from everyone and putting it towards the road, if the government just took donations for the road, no one would be donating. They'd just be free riding on what everybody else is donating through the tragedy of the commons. But because the government can fund things like schools or roads, where people's selfishness wouldn't allow that, wouldn't selfishness wouldn't be enough of a motivator to create public works projects like that, but the government can. The government, by acting coercively, it can create something that is in everyone's best interest at the end of the line. So how do you think anarchism, like if people are going to act as selfishly in an anarchist society as they would act today, how do you think it's possible to have something like education or law enforcement or firefighters or programs for the poor in anarchist society?
I don't think I could prescribe any single set of solution. I think every single version of anarchism has their own solution to those problems. So I don't think I could state a single solution. But I mean, the only thing I could say is cooperation between the people.
Okay,
Like if the for the people, like the parents that want to their children to be taught, they will go to the people that want to teach, and then from there they can organize and do whatever. You know what I mean?
but then
In
what?
whatever means that society says you can.
Okay, but then what about like orphans who don't have parents or parents who are poor? Or I don't know, maybe there are poor people who are they gonna like for law enforcement? Are you just gonna have private defense agencies? Because much of the time the good of law enforcement is based on deterring crime, and if and there's sort of a free rider problem there where some you don't have to be in a private defense agency because enough other people are that it's going to deter crime, but then it's effectively a race to the bottom. So I guess I would ask is when you say you don't know how an anarchist society would solve these problems, do you not see that as, I don't know, a problem? Because if you don't know, if you can't sort of come out and say how you think these solutions would be prescribed, then we can't just sort of assume that someone's going to come up with a solution. We can sort of look at the power vacuums that exist today and the governments and what the government has done and say, in practice, it seems like the government has been the only way to solve the tragedy of the commons in a lot of cases.
Well, I mean, okay. The reason I can't say how an anarchist society would actually play out is because I think each problem is too specific for like geographical like things. There's so many factors, right? That for me to prescribe anything, it would yeah, I don't know. Like even if I prescribed you something, if it would actually even happen, like what I would tell you might even be the worst idea possible. But the point is that I do trust that human cooperation could um could solve pretty much every issue. I mean, the state is just coercive organization.
Okay,
Like
but
I think if people really needed something, I think they would do it.
okay, but we have examples like near the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, where I don't know, children were just being abandoned or like orphans. There were sort of no without social welfare programs for them. You just had people being left on the street. You've had during the Great Depression, before social safety net programs, you had a lot of people sort of starving on the street because there were no nets for them. So how do you account for all of those societies where there was no state program and people's cooperation wasn't solving the problem? You just had people were acting in their own best interest and a lot of people were suffering because of it. Does How do you know that we wouldn't just go back to that?
I mean, okay, for one, wait, do you understand that the Great Depression and the fall of the Roman Empire were only things that happened because of states, right? And right now, right, states do give us things that we do need, um, like that are not privatized, right?
Well, I disagree
Like such
that.
such as such as such as free healthcare, right? Like right now, we need free healthcare, right? Because there's so many patents, there's so many IPs, right? And there's so many regulations that unfortunately the state does need to come and help. But I don't believe I if the state never did anything, I think that the Great Depression and the fall of the Roman Empire and like children being alone, just wouldn't happen as much. And I mean, anarchism, like bad things would probably still happen. Maybe there will still be orphans, right? I mean, I don't think it's a utopia, right?
Mhm. Well,
I just think that anarchism could fix it better than what the state does, and there can be welfare programs in anarchism, like the Zapatistas right now. they have free healthcare and education and recreation centers, despite there being no taxes. Even in past societies, there was gift economies. You know what I mean? Like there are many ways that people can help out for each other. Yeah, with no like coercive state or welfare programs.
Okay, but the Zapatistas do have a system of taxation.
They do?
That's what I'm not super familiar with this group, but I'm just sort of Googling them. It says they charge a 10% tax on projects outside agencies, group of masked peasants. I don't. It says they're a far left group. I don't. I'm not super familiar with them. But I maybe if they maybe I'm wrong about this, but it says it's certainly the Zapatistas do have a system of taxation. They charge a 10% tax on projects by outside agencies. Within communities, assembly decisions are resourced by labor and contributions. So I'm to some extent they are coercive because they are forcing people.
Oh yeah, I see. I see I see the Zapatistas do not collect taxes from their own communities and to reject government aid. And so I see self-governance. Yeah, they tax other like outside the Zapatistas.
So, but that is you're putting coercion on somebody. I mean, they have to get the money from somewhere, so they are sort of forcing people to pay them money.
I believe I mean the Zapatistas are I don't think they're very territorial, right? But if someone goes in there, right, and like says, I want to set up here, they would go to the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would agree. Similar to how right now, if you want a burger, right, you would go to the local restaurant and tell them what the fee is. You know what I mean? They're paying a fee. I wouldn't call it a taxation, right?
Okay.
And that would be voluntary, right? It's like it's a transactional thing.
Maybe
But if someone
maybe to some extent, I mean it's kind of similar to governments today, where you sort of conquer land and then say if you want to live in the country, you have to pay some amount of tax.
no, but see, okay, no, because someone came into that country and they voluntarily. I mean, no, someone agreed to go into these 7 municipalities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they talked to the government or whoever,
Yeah.
whatever they wanted to put their shop in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they agreed on with the fees and the taxation, right? And the Zapatista government, they don't tax their own that were involuntarily born, because like they never volunteered to be born, so they never volunteer for a social contract.
Okay,
like you see that would be the big difference, I would say. Like I have to pay taxes just because I was born here.
Okay,
Zapatistas don't.
If somebody else wants to go into the land where the Zapatistas have claimed, they would charge a fee, correct?
For that business, does it not say that business? I don't think if you just like if you stay there and live there, you're gonna start getting taxed on whatever.
Okay,
right?
I'll admit that I'm not familiar with the Zapatistas, so maybe I just won't. Let's say you're correct about this specific case, because I just kind of be guessing here. So I would just say like in a broad level, I think we see the fall of the Roman Empire, I think, is an example I picked because that's the absence of a state. You're saying that wouldn't exist without the state, but if we didn't have a state, then just not being a Roman Empire or the equivalent to the collapse of the state would just be the default case, right? So what we have with the infanticide was sort of a common practice in the cases before you sort of had publicly funded foster care and adoption services. And maybe you'll have some groups that take care of their own, but I don't think you can account for that in a general case. Like you can have sort of tribes that will take care of their own people, but you don't know that that's going to, are they going to protect everyone? Because we've had a lot of power vacuums where they
haven't. In Native American society?
I mean, I can give you plenty of examples of power vacuums that have led to a lot of poor people not being taken care of or starvation on the streets. I mean, if the idea is that human cooperation is going to form in the absence of strong government, that human cooperation is going to solve all these problems, then why during the Great Depression could they not do that? I mean, sure, there was a state, but could voluntary groups that take care of the poor not have formed? I mean, they had every opportunity to, and yet they didn't.
I would say because the state made so many resources inaccessible. Like so many people were poor. Not many people were rich enough to protect others. But there are cases where the state, when resources are available, people share. Such as the Black Panther Party, giving free healthcare and free breakfast programs to people,
Sure. Okay.
because there was
But
an abundance of resources, right?
I
But I
disagree that
think,
the state has made it more difficult to access those resources because, let's say, for example, progressive taxation, where you've had a lot of distribution from higher people with higher incomes have paid higher taxes, and then that can be put towards social safety nets. Or, for example, monopolies. You had monopolies for a long time. I think that was around the time of the Great Depression, and there, or maybe that might have been earlier, but you had monopolistic practices, and then the state could sort of force competition in the markets, put or sort of put bigger regulations on monopolies that were dominating the market. And then after that, we saw greater social welfare effects after certain policies were passed.
uh, well, actually, I don't know my economics enough to talk about this, but I mean, the very little I know, I'm pretty sure that the only way monopolies even happen is from state help. I don't think monopolies are natural in a true free market.
Well, in a true free market, but much as the state can come in and sort of infringe on people's freedoms, you could just have sort of, I don't know, a terrorist group or a group with a lot of guns that comes in and infringes on freedom and fills the power vacuum that was there because you've abolished the state. So in a way,
Well, I
the
mean,
state is an authority that preempts other authorities from coming in because at least we have democratic control of the state. And you don't know that, I don't know, if you overthrow the current government, that it's not going to be replaced by a dictatorship or something much worse.
I mean, now do you want to talk about like enforcement?
Sure, we can
Is
talk
that
about enforcement.
okay? When I know in a lot of stateless societies,
Hmm.
or even in current anarchist societies, they're not just stateless like for like the fun of it. They have specific
Hmm.
like things they do and like cultural practices they do that prevents a power vacuum. So
Okay,
like
but
I just don't think a power vacuum would just come, right? Or
so
like
maybe
just another terrorist organ. Maybe another terrorist organization could come and take them out, right? But I would say that in no state of society have we seen that they just kind of let themselves fall and they
mhm,
have no military. I mean, but also you could say that about any state, right? I mean, right
sure.
now we live in the universe, right? At least I don't know if you live in America, right? We live in the universe where a terrorist organization did come and conquered us, right?
Conquered America?
Huh?
Or conquered the United States?
Yeah.
Well, which one?
Their name is literally the United States of America. They are the criminal organization that
They are
imposes their will
okay.
on
So you
people.
would consider that okay, but there are
Like
criminal org. Okay, but the United States does have a representative democratic system. Would you dispute that?
um I mean I guess to the definition of like what a representative government is, then sure we do have a representative government. But I personally don't believe it is truly free or
Okay,
at least freedom. 'Cause, I mean it's
I
not anarchism, right? So to me it's not even freedom
I agree
or
there are
democratic.
restrictions on freedom, but let's say we collapse the U.S. government. I don't know, tomorrow, and then there's a power vacuum, obviously, and you've said that these states would have ways to stop the power vacuum, but I think the groups that you're talking about exist on a much smaller scale. So the type of weapons that nations have right now aren't the type of things that are accessible to the Zapatistas. So if if you're talking about maybe we have 100 different tribes, are these anarchist groups going? Are they going to have nuclear weapons? Because then you have 100 different groups running around with nuclear weapons. Are they going to not have those kinds of weapons? Because then a terrorist group that does have those is going to have a pretty big advantage. So to protect the power vacuum, you're going to need some system of enforcement that has the strongest military weapons that exist, but that is in some way accountable to being regulated by the public at large.
How an anarchist US would actually play out. I don't know how it would play out, right? So like I said, I mean I don't know if I can prescribe you what would happen, right? Because I'm not a fortune teller.
So
So
I don't know. This has been going kind of long. So I guess maybe we just sort of each give concluding arguments, and then we can kind of just to make sure that I don't know that your point gets through and my point gets through. Um,
mm,
so okay, so I guess I would conclude by saying I think there's a lot of cases. I will admit that maybe it's not realistic for me to say that you should know every single detail about how an anarchist system would play out, but I do think that having this level of uncertainty is a liability, especially when we've seen a lot of power vacuums that have played out very poorly, with other terrorist groups coming in, and the system of weaponry has rapidly advanced in the world, such that a smaller scale government probably wouldn't be able to protect it from hostile powers that have the most powerful weapons. And we probably don't want a lot of independent small scale groups running around with the most powerful weapons that exist when those weapons include nukes. But yeah, I would say that the government, while it does infringe on some liberty, may be a necessary evil to prevent a worse power filling the power vacuum and creating social safety nets. And I'll hand it over to you to have the last word.
Yeah, I think I would just conclude that I think I just believe that human cooperation can fix all these problems, and I think if human cooperation truly didn't work, I think we would still live in caves, not knowing what fire is. Right? And I just don't believe that we're just going to extinction just because there's no coercive or involuntary hierarchy.
All right. Thank you for that discussion. Very
Mhm.
enlightening. And yeah, it was just good to sort of discuss both sides of this. Did you enjoy this video? Comment below to say who you think won and what other topics you'd like to see discussed. And if you have any strong opinions you want to defend, head over to debatecraft.com and start a debate today. That's debatecraft.com. We have rated debates, informal debates, and an official leaderboard so you can test your skills against other strong debaters. You can also join the Discord server linked in the video description and become a member of our community. As always, thanks for watching.